Nearly 20 of the last 25 years of woodworking for me has been relying on melamine as my bench surface. It wasn't until I built my current workbench 4 years ago that I started to really understand the importance of a well-crafted bench. Besides a solid surface to clamp and pound on, there are so many additions that make using my bench more enjoyable and more practical in my everyday projects. Like table saws and other large machinery, I found that jigs called appliances could be used in conjunction with the bench to create a better experience. In this video, we're going to look at some very old appliances that are so old we really don't know their age of conception. Besides those, I've sprinkled a few of my own ideas in that have really helped in my day-to-day projects. Like my last full-size tip video, I've indexed each of the tips so that you can easily move on if you've already seen the tip. I've also got links you'll find in the description that go along with the video. Really, does anyone else smell smoke?
There's a flame that burns inside myself.
Planing stops are some of the oldest appliances for the almighty bench. Images of these simple fixtures can be found in André Philippian's Principles of Architecture, published in 1676. With a set of teeth that lay horizontal with the bench top, a piece of stock is bumped into the end of it that grips the work, allowing pressure to be pushed against it, which is why they're so often used when planing. A simple plane stop can be made with a hex head bolt that fits your dog hole. I cut the head so that it's thinner, sectioned off a few segments with a hacksaw, and used a sander to add teeth. When stock is pushed against this, it'll force the board to the face of the bench. While this works, the problem with this is that if we're using a wider piece of stock than our bolts, the wood tends to pivot. A better option is to add a planing stop to the end of your bench. I made a planing stop out of a piece of steel that I cut teeth into and a block of wood. It attaches to the table with a threaded rod. When I need it, I lock it in place with a knob, and when I don't, it drops down out of the way. If you're interested, I have a free video and plans to make this in the description below. One of the greatest bench appliances that man has created has to be the double screw vise. It works like this. You have a removable vise that easily clamps to the surface. This does a few things for you. First, it raises the work off the bench, getting you closer to your stock, which puts your arm in a better position to saw. Second, it gives you a full throat of space to clamp instead of the shallow spot a single screw vise gives you. Finally, it leaves the surface of your bench free when you don't need it. But what if we add a second horizontal vise to the top? This will allow us to work not only on the end grain of the joint, but allows us to work on the face. We can even use both faces to get the highly sought after 90-degree angle. Add some grippy tracker runner and we reduce the pressure needed to clamp things in place. We can ditch the hold fast and F clamps needed to hold it on the bench if we add a non-threaded hex bolt and string it into a dog hole. I've created a full video dedicated to the double screw vise, also known as the Moxon vise. I've dug through history to find some interesting bits of information, found out why it's called the Moxon vise. I also explain how it's meant to be used and show you how I added my own ideas to help improve workflow. You can find a link to that video in the description below. A bench hook is a very simple device that uses forward force and the edge of any surface to keep your stock in place as you work with it. They're an important tool that should be in every maker workbench appliance arsenal. While there are several different shapes and ways to build these either by using a single board or by building them with joinery or screws, they're meant to be used with frontward force saws like back saws, which press them against the hook. Japanese pull saws, on the other hand, require a different approach. In my latest video, I came up with a slightly modified method that doesn't rely on body force. I'm not exerting my energy into the wood, but instead allowing my table to brace my board so that I can focus more on precise and clean cuts. While it doesn't attach to any and every surface like the normal bench hook, it uses a dog hole in my table. If you're interested in a brief history of the simple bench appliance known as the bench hook, as well as seeing if my newfangled version is worthy of making, you can find it in the description of this video. Bench vices are great tools for working on the edge of your stock, either for planing, gluing, or assembly. If the stock you're using is roughly the same size as your vise, you're good to go and need only to tighten it down. But longer boards need a different approach entirely, as the pressure you put farther down from the clamp becomes like a lever. You can't argue with physics. We'll create something called a board jack, and really all you'll need is a hole next to the edge of the top of your bench top. We'll use a door hinge attached to a couple boards. The tabletop board will get a 3/4 inch hole and we'll add a dowel. The second one that hangs off the bench will get rows of holes that are 3/4 inches in diameter. You'll need a third board that's the thickness of the other two. This will sit in your vise and give you clearance for your board jack. Now when you need to clamp a longer board, grab your jack and add it to your tabletop using a peg in the correct hole. Because every tool should have a place, we'll add a screw and hang our board jack on the leg of the bench, out of the way. I have a longer build on my second channel with step-by-step instructions, a material list, all free. You can find a link to it in the description below. Having a gap that's 3 to 4 inches on the edge of the bench is one of the best planning decisions you can make when you build your own workbench. This makes clamping down stock easy as you're giving your clamp something to grab onto. But sometimes clamps can be intrusive when you're doing things like sanding or routing. Instead, make a bench stop, which is nothing more than a board with 2 dowels that fit inside the dog holes on the bench top. I'll take a piece of hard maple and add 2 holes, but instead of drilling holes that are the size of the 3/4 inch dog holes, I made mine 5/8 in diameter, which makes it much easier to add the stop later on. You could add a couple 5/8 inch dowels and glue them in, and this would give you a great edge to work off of, but instead I'm going to switch to 5/8 bolts. Using bolts will allow me to use this as a bench stop as well as a dovetail hold down. With a couple homemade knobs, dovetail hold downs use the bench stop as a giant clamp, allowing you to hold large surfaces down for carving or for making dovetails. The holdfast is a steel hook that quickly holds down your work with a swing of a mallet. This tool is more than 300 years old and can be found in Joseph Moxon's mechanic exercise book, written in 1692. Its best-selling features are its speed, durability, and simplicity. Instead of wrestling with clamps to keep things from moving, it only takes a single blow to keep things in place. The only requirements you'll need for this is a hole and a mallet. As far as the bench thickness requirements, this tool actually does better with thinner bench tops and does fine with softwood like my pine bench top. You might be tempted to clamp your work in a vise, but any downward pressure you put on it, like swinging a mallet against a chisel, means possible movement. With the holdfast, you can hold your work down and don't have to worry about it moving with blunt force. The downfall to these simple tools is that there's a chance of the work pivoting, but this can be taken care of with a piece of leather on the end of your hooks. My favorite part of these tools is how easy it is to remove and put them away. Smack them on the back edge and they pop up and your work is free. If you're interested, you can buy these online, but it's much more gratifying picking them up from a local smith. My workbench is the centerpiece of my shop. I glue, stain, finish, buff, build, and even cut steel with it. While I've heard some people claim that cutting steel should be done far away from my bench, there's an obvious bench appliance to keep nearby to clean up any spent steel: the almighty tool holder magnetic bar. This one comes from Harbor Freight and picks up even the tiniest slivers from the bench top. Because it is just U-channel with several rectangular magnets lining the inside, I decided to add a handle. I took off 2 magnets in all and cut the edges of the U-channel up to the magnets. This gives me a metal tang that I can use to slide into a handle. After drilling a couple holes, I use split dowels with Purple Heart wedges to hold everything together. Cleaning the bench off after cutting steel is a swipe, and it's put back away. If you've got a spare magnet tool holder laying around and want to overcomplicate it by adding a herringbone handle, check out the build I made in the description below. Having enough light in the shop is like having all the tools you need to get a job done. Will a pair of pliers alone turn a nut? Yes, but a socket wrench will do it even better. Light keeps us from tripping over the shop vac, but it is also one of the most vital tools in the tool belt. If you're struggling to get the light you need on your workbench, there's 3 simple things you need to get the perfect lighting when you need it most. You'll need a 3/4 inch dowel, a clamp light, and a 3/4 inch hole in your bench. Assembly: the dowel goes in the hole, the light is clamped to the dowel, and you're done. It's easy to store the 2 components, so storage isn't an issue. If your bench is covered with dog holes, this means you can put light anywhere you need it. A second option, if you don't have a hole, is to use a pipe clamp clamped to the edge. It's not quite as versatile as a bench full of holes, but it does beat the darkness. If you're interested in either option, you can grab one of these clamp lights off of Amazon for a pretty good price. A common annoyance for bench vices is the time they take for the jaws to open and close. True, some vices have a quick release mechanism, but for the rest of us, there's a quick way to cinch down your stock fast. I'll make a handle with an additional spinning handle that will quickly allow the vise to open and close. I made this by creating a large mortise out of 2 pieces of stock. The mortise was an easy build and started with 6 pieces of lumber. After gluing the ends, I drilled 8 holes through the center and an 1.25 inch hole on the end that housed my bearing assembly and a couple wood washers. I created dowels from bite size 18 and 111 and hammered them in. With the lathe, I cut it down to size, removed the dowels, spread the glue, and added it to my vise. Getting the dowels back in was a little tricky, but I managed, and now it's much faster to open and close the vise. If you don't want to put as much time into this, a simpler route is to buy a steering wheel spinner and add it to your bar. I've got one I found on Amazon. You can check that one out or watch the full build on my bench vise handle in the description below. To use a circular saw to break down large pieces of stock, I used to clamp it to my bench top with the stock hanging over the edge. The first 2/3 of the cut usually went well, until the stock started sagging, and then it would catch, there'd be kickback, or the wood would crack. It wasn't good. The real trick to cutting stock is to keep the part you're cutting and the parts you're separating on the same plane. The cut you make shouldn't cause any movement at all. This, of course, is how miter and radial arm saws work safely. To create the same method where both stock pieces stay on the same plane, I use a few pieces of plywood that's coated on both sides with something you can buy pretty much at any big box hardware store, Tracker Runner. It's a carpet material that has a rubber backing used to grip flooring. You add Mod Podge to the carpet side and then to both sides of your 3/4 inch piece of plywood, and give it a squeeze for a few hours. The grippy boards grip your stock and the table and prevents movement. I found that I can use a router on the top of these, sand stock as well as holding the vices that cut steel without any clamps. It's a great addition to add to the rest of your bench appliances. Thank you so much for watching, and what was your favorite tip? Leave me a comment below and let me know. A big thank you to my patrons that help keep the bench appliances powered. Thank you. Michelle B., Keith Current, William L. McNally, Jerry Adams, Zach Finch, Rich Lightfoot, Tutor the Barbarian, Mike Lornitis, Les N., and Gary G. Hit the thumbs up, subscribe, and ring that bell. And I thank you so much for being a part of my shop. Please leave a comment below, come find me on Instagram at MakeThingsWithRob, and remember to keep making things.
Like to be like me. There is a flame that burns inside myself.